My husband overheard his boss talk about my bed skills to his coworkers and never came home. I loved my husband. He was one of the few people in my life who uplifted me in a time of my life where no one was on my side. But I did something horrible that changed everything between us and for us. I wanted to accept that there wasn't anything I could do to change it, but I wasn't so sure anymore. Hello, Redditors. My name is Daniela, and I'm 29 years old. I haven't been married for that long, but my husband and I were in a 3-year relationship before we decided to get married. Or at least he ended up proposing to me while we were at one of our family reunions. You could imagine the excitement I had about getting married to the love of my life at last. I had met him at a difficult time in my life. You could say he was my saving grace, my angel that I never knew I needed to rescue me. That time, my parents were going through a divorce after 20 years of being married, and my heart was broken by my first boyfriend, who I thought would one day be my husband. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I was a mess, even though I was close to graduating from my dream university and I was doing my dream course. I should have focused on what was important, but what I was going through clouded my mind so badly that I failed the first semester entirely. I broke off most of my friendships. I didn't show up for group projects, and I was possibly going to drop out of university just like that. Then one day, when I let myself have a day to be away from my troubles, I went to a coffee shop down the corner from my student residence. I wasn't planning on having much, and I wasn't planning to stay long either. I bought myself a coffee and a donut and went to sit in an isolated place. I must have looked weird or lonely because a guy approached me. He had the most beautiful pair of blue eyes I'd seen, and he was attractive. I remember what I thought when I looked at him, that this man was gorgeous, and he would make beautiful babies, but I had to obviously stop myself from thinking such things. When he got closer to me, he asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I didn't really think giving a stranger my life story would make me feel any better, so I told him a lie. He looked at me as if he didn't believe me, then proceeded to ask if I wouldn't mind any company. I wanted to say I had somewhere to go. I wanted to turn him down right then and there because I didn't want any company, but for some reason, his kind eyes really drew me in, so I let him come over with his latte and 2 muffins. To say it was the best day of my life in a while would be exaggerating, but he made me smile and laugh the whole time. He really knew what to say, as if he could tell I had troubles and he wanted to help me blow them all away like they were nothing. They weren't, but I wanted to dream just for a second. He gave me that chance, so I went back home to my comfortable little room and realized that I hadn't smiled in a while, and I wanted my happiness back so badly. That day, I told myself that I'd stop being miserable and start doing my best again because this wasn't what I wanted to amount to. A few weeks down the line, I had gotten back the strength to become an academic warrior. I made sure I came out with the best marks possible in the second semester, and I submitted each assignment on time. It wasn't easy to pick up where I left off, and it wasn't easy to try to make friends when people had already chosen their little circle in the time I was still wallowing in my misery. It all kicked off at some point, though, and although I wasn't over my parents' divorce, I was training myself to accept it because there wasn't anything for me to do about it. I learned in those moments that there's really just more to life than focusing on things you can't change. While I was trying to build myself back up and trying to enjoy my university life, I still went to that coffee shop and waited for days on end so I could meet that guy again. He never really introduced himself, and I was an idiot for never having asked for his name. But I wanted to see him again. I had that desire for months on end, and he didn't show up. I almost thought I'd never see him again when one day in spring he showed up so unexpectedly that I was shocked when I saw him. Seeing him then, I realized I hadn't paid much attention to him even though I did think he was effortlessly beautiful. He was, and even more than that. His actions were so kind, and he seemed like someone who attracted a lot of people to him because of his kind nature. It was interesting to watch him waiting in line and conversing with a 5-year-old child he didn't even know. I genuinely just wondered if seeing him again was a sign. What sign? I didn't even know myself. Walking up to him would possibly lead to the best thing in my life, or even the worst. Life was unpredictable, and yet I still took my chances. When I approached him and said hi, he was surprised to see me. I was even more surprised to see him because it had been months, and when I said that to him, he gave me the cutest smile I'd remember forever. He said he wanted to make up for those months and offered to buy me coffee today and another day because he wanted to take me out on a date. Was I crazy for saying yes to a guy I'd just met for the second time? Yes, but again, I took my chances and I said yes. He introduced himself as Julian when he asked for my numbers so he can give me the time and place for our date. And then we started dating soon after, and things were pure bliss. I had even forgotten my ex-boyfriend Matthew existed because Julian was giving me so much love and taking care of me in every way possible that I couldn't possibly think of someone who only thought of using me for their own benefit. My boyfriend and I were so well fitted for each other that it was impossible to separate us. We worked towards our academic goals together, but we waited to move in together because we thought that should be something for marriage. We spent our 3 years so happy that I never noticed how much time had passed because once we graduated, we thought about the life we'd be starting together. And that was all that mattered. Never the time. It wasn't until on our 3rd year anniversary, he asked if I wouldn't mind going to a family reunion with him that everything changed. That morning, I was oblivious to what he would do because we spent our anniversaries going to different places, and I didn't mind us going to be with his family during our special day. We spent a few hours helping around the house and talking to his family members. When his mother pulled me aside to talk to me, I didn't expect Julian to be behind me on his knee. I heard from the gasps around me and looked at them as they looked at something behind me. And when I turned around to find him like that, I wanted to cry. I hadn't expected this so early. I thought it would take us a few more years because we were still trying to be financially stable. But he said to me, as though he could tell what I was thinking and he wanted to reassure me, "We'll figure life out together, just be my wife and the rest will follow." I believed him because in all these 3 years together, he had become my best friend, my partner in crime, and the man I knew I could trust the most. And even though I had a tiny bit of doubt in my mind about this, I said yes once again, like I had 3 years ago when he asked me out on a date. And I wanted to believe that I wouldn't regret this decision. Our wedding day was amazing, and all our loved ones came, including my parents who decided to unite for one day just to support their daughter. Although I still had cold feet about that day, I wanted us to be together for a long time more than anything, and this encouraged me to walk down the aisle with my father by my side. And when I saw my husband cry, tears started welling in my eyes too. I realized at that moment that I was getting married to the love of my life, and it really was the happiest day of my life. There wasn't any need for me to think of anything else except him, and once we exchanged vows, we sealed it with a kiss. The honeymoon was just as great as the wedding, and we spent a week there together enjoying each other's company. We were in our own little bubble, and it felt like it was us against the world. There wasn't anything I remembered that could top those moments I shared with him. Once we got back home, our marriage was smooth sailing. We focused on each other and worked together once again as a time when we moved in together. What I loved most about my husband was that he helped me with the chores and cooking since it was just us two. Our parents came to visit here and there, but it was mostly us in our cozy little apartment. We had only decided to save and buy a house when we started having kids together, and that wasn't even in our plans anytime soon. We spent 4 years together, happy, and yes, we had our disagreements here and there, but we never really dwelled on them. We communicated and moved past them because we didn't want our marriage to have holes that will end up sinking our ship. And then, suddenly, in our 4th year, my husband wasn't as available to spend time with me as he usually was. I didn't accuse him of anything and patiently waited for him to have time for me, but things didn't get any better. It wasn't until one day that I went to his office to give him the lunch I made for him since he left too early before I could make him anything. I'd once visited him at work, so I knew where to go if I wanted to see him and what time his lunch was because he'd informed me, so if I wanted to bring him lunch, I wouldn't have any trouble. I got on his floor, and once I climbed off the elevator, I saw him standing with a lady, and the way he looked at her somehow didn't sit well with me. But I didn't want to be suspicious of my husband, so I asked the secretary to give it to him and left immediately. Once I was out of the building, I tried to calm down my breathing and my heart that was pounding very fast. So I took some deep breaths, and when I calmed down, I turned to leave, but a car honked at me. I wasn't sure if it was honking at me, but when I kept moving and it happened again, I stopped and turned to look who it was. The person rolled down the window, and when he fully showed himself, I saw my ex-boyfriend. I wasn't expecting to see him, and I did forgive him for all that happened those years ago, but I didn't want to see him right now. I walked away, but he kept following me, and I stopped again to ask him what he wanted from me. He said he wanted to grab some bite to eat and asked if I would mind joining him. I thought about it, and it wasn't a good idea, but I needed something to get my mind off of what I thought I saw. So I agreed, impulsively perhaps, and I ended up going to his favorite place around the corner to have lunch. No, we caught up on each other's life, and I found out he wasn't married. It was a shock of its own, but I didn't dare ask why. For 30 minutes we talked, and then we both had to go back to work. He offered to take me, but I refused, so he asked for my number instead. I hesitated and just gave him because I thought the past was in the past, and there was no reason to be cautious about this since nothing would happen between us anyway. I was so wrong. I was so wrong because we started talking so much that I started getting excited whenever we had to meet up for lunch. We went to the same place we went to the first time we saw each other again, and I was slowly starting to enjoy being in his company. I felt as though he was a breath of fresh air from the lonely days without my husband, and made up for the nights my husband would go to bed without even telling me goodnight by texting me until late. It became a nasty routine at one point, and although I thought a friendship was blooming between us, there might have started to be more, but I didn't think much of the subtle looks he gave me and little gestures he made. The flowers he'd give me whenever we met, and chocolates because he remembered how much I loved them. He was tapping into my weaknesses slowly but surely, and I knew it, and I let it happen. This led to something happening a few months after we met again. We were supposed to meet up for lunch as per usual, and that day my husband had left for his business trip for a few days. Matthew ended up canceling on me for lunchtime and told me to meet up with him at a certain time because he had something else to do. I went along with it, and when the time came for us to meet, we ended up going to his place. Yes, I should have known this was a trap, and what made everything worse was I perhaps wanted all of this to happen. When we had arrived, we headed straight for the living room, and at first, he seemed in a chatting mood as though he wasn't going to make any move on me. It was fine by me, and as much as my husband was still neglecting me, I wasn't sure an affair would solve anything. Then, while we were watching movies, Matthew got a little too close. I didn't mind it at first, so I let it be as we kept commenting and laughing at what was going on screen. He then turned to look at me, and I asked why he was staring, to which he replied, "You're beautiful." I didn't want to react. I didn't want this to waken anything within me because I knew what happened the last time I let this man fool me. But still, I was so weak and so lonely that my heart raced and my cheeks flushed. It was the first time in months since I'd been told I was beautiful, and to fall for such a cheap trick. It was stupid of me because when he saw my reaction, he leaned forward and kissed me. All those feelings I tried to ignore resurfaced, and I became impulsive and I kissed him back. We made out on his couch, and before you knew it, he lifted me up to his bedroom. There, a lot of things took place. I did a lot of things I came to regret once we were done, and although I did regret it, we kept it up for the next few weeks. Even when my husband returned from his trip, we still met and had sex, over and over again. Except for one night where I wanted to spend it with my husband and treat him to a full-course meal because of the guilt I felt for what I was doing. Things were not smoothing over for us, but I kept trying to bring us back to how we used to be. He still wasn't attentive, but he tried to come back home as early as possible to meet me halfway. It only lasted for a week until he completely didn't come back home, for a whole week. I was very worried, so I called everyone I knew. I called my in-laws who didn't know where he was. I called his friends and they had no idea either. I was such a mess at work because I was thinking about where my husband could have possibly been. He didn't contact me or tell me if he's busy with a business trip somewhere. He went quiet on me. The only way I could feel sane was by going to see Matthew and sleeping with him again. This wasn't a healthy pattern I had set for myself, but I wanted to use someone to forget about my troubles and my husband missing. It felt like all those years back when everything was falling apart. Once a week had passed, I took a day off from work to cool my mind. It was a good idea because I ended up relaxing and taking my mind off my husband in a better, much more healthier way. I went out for a jog and watched movies and ignored everyone who was texting me, including Matthew, because I wasn't in the mood for him. Later on, I decided to go shopping for clothes and get a message on the way back home. Once I got there, I found my husband on the couch. He looked exhausted, and it looked as though he'd developed a beard in just a week of going missing. I didn't approach him at first because I felt something was off about what was going on. I knew somehow that whatever conversation we would have was going to change things between us. When he noticed I was in the room, he looked over at me, and the way he stared at me said a lot. He knew something, and his next words confirmed my suspicion and biggest fear. "Why did you cheat on me?" I wonder how he found out about it, and I didn't have any way to answer him, so I denied doing it. I lied and said, "I never did such a thing, and I'd never betray him like that," but he looked me in my eyes and told me how he overheard his boss telling his coworkers about my bed skills. How I was a wild freak in bed. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't even want to admit it. How could I tell my husband that I cheated with my ex? And to think that very ex was his boss. I should have known something was up when my ex started being attentive to me, and I should have known it was all part of his game. My head was spinning, and from my lack of a response, he took it as an answer and left again. He came back the next day and said he'd cleared his mind, and he wanted us to start over again. I accepted this and swore I'd cut off all ties with Matthew. That night, we slept together for the first time in months, and the next morning, I found divorce papers next to the bed with a note that said, "Leave my house, please." I was devastated because I thought we'd finally patched things up, and I cried. I stayed to demand an explanation, but he wouldn't listen to me, and so I was kicked out and I had to look for some place to stay. I went over to Matthew's place to confront him because it was all his fault this happened. There was a lady I'd never seen at his place, and she answered the door. She called Matthew, and he had this evil smile on his face, which meant he knows what he did. I asked him why he ruined my life, and he told me he saw a chance and he took it because he knew how easy I was most times. I went back home to stay with my dad because I didn't have anywhere to stay. He knew something was up, and I told him what happened. As expected, he was disappointed in me. Work wasn't going so well either because I was distracted, and I didn't put in the effort to finish most of the projects. I couldn't even feel pity for myself because I did this to myself. I finally accepted the divorce and signed the papers. We officially divorced in our 4th year of marriage, and I didn't ask for anything. Over a simple misunderstanding, I ended up in the arms of a man, and I ruined my own marriage. There was no one else to blame but me, and I'd live the rest of my life knowing I ruined a good thing. Asterisk update asterisk. A year later, I discovered that I was HIV positive. Apparently, the night my ex-husband and I slept with each other, he infected me with it from wherever he caught it. It was the most devastating thing to have gone through, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone about it. Julian blocked my numbers and on social media as well. It was clear he had no intention of speaking to me again. His parents found out about the divorce, but luckily he never told them what was the cause of it. I still talked to them to check if he was okay. My mother knew the real reason and scolded me about what a huge mistake I made and how much of an idiot I was. As per usual, Matthew and I didn't talk anymore. I didn't try to stay in contact with him, and I moved to another state to get away from my humiliating past, and I didn't know who would want me now with this illness. I figured it was my fault for getting it because if it wasn't for me, my ex-husband wouldn't have gone out and contracted such a thing. I had to come to terms with everything that had happened. It ruined my life, and I was going to be on medicine for the rest of it. I wasn't even sure if Julian knew that he had it and if he was getting treated to it. I had no right to such things anymore, but in the back of my mind, he was still the man I fell in love with, and I still cared about his health. I regret everything that happened, and if I could take it all back, I really would. I'd even beg Julian to take me back, or I wouldn't have started meeting up with Matthew again. I won't blame him because I gave in to temptation, and at the end of the day, I lost someone precious to me. This is something that I can never recover from, and I'd spend the last days of my life wondering why I never just spoke to my husband and made my feelings clear, because maybe then we could have saved our marriage together. I forgot to remind myself that this was a two-way street and not just an alone thing. If there is any advice you can take from this, it's please don't take your person for granted and communicate, because it could save the both of you and your relationship.